I want to begin this morning with a question, and the question is this. Have you ever been somewhere while at the same time wishing you were somewhere else? Anybody ever done that? Maybe it's Monday and you wish it were Friday. Maybe it's Wednesday and you wish it were the weekend. Maybe you're sitting in a class and you're wishing you were at home sleeping or playing video games or something. Or maybe you're at work and you're thinking about fishing or playing golf or doing something, anything but what you're doing. Or maybe it's a Thursday afternoon and you're at a Virginia Tech football game and they're playing West Virginia and you're a Virginia Tech fan and you're getting beat like you stole something. I'm sure you wish you were somewhere else at that moment. Somebody texted me this week and said that game was hard to watch yesterday. And I was like, I'm not so sure what was so hard about watching it. And they said, I guess it's all about perspective. And I guess it is, depending on which side of the field you're sitting on, right? But we've all been there. Well, this summer, Lynette and I, we were in Arizona visiting Nathan and Evelyn, my son and daughter-in-law. And we were staying at this campground called Apache Junction. In fact, here's a picture of our home away from home. We'd been there about a week, and it was a little warm. In fact, it was Sunday morning, and the high for the day was going to be 114 degrees, 2 degrees warmer than it was the day before. Well, Saturday night, as Lynette was about to go to sleep, she said, I'm not feeling too good. And I kind of laughed and not making fun of her, right, just because I hadn't been feeling too good either. And, we just figured with the climate change, and it felt like allergies, so I'd been taking some allergy medicine, and it seemed to be helping. But she seemed to be escaping that up until Saturday evening, and so when she went to bed, she just said, I don't feel good, and kind of laughed, said, yeah, you're probably getting what I have. Well, she woke up Sunday morning running a fever, which is kind of funny because at 112 degrees, it's hard to tell if it's a fever or not, you know what I'm saying? But anyway, so she tested her, took her temperature, and sure enough, and so we knew what we had planned that day, and we thought, well, we better test, if you know what I mean, for the COVID, and before we go hang out with some folks. And so we had taken a test kit with us. She pulls it out, we take it, she takes it, and I'm gonna tell you, that thing popped positive so quick, I thought, there's no way that can be right, because it takes longer than that for that to give you the result. And I thought, well, this one's been out here in the heat for several days. Let me go to the store and find another one. So I go to the store, 3 stores later, we finally find some that were in stock, come back to the campground, we pull them out, take them again, we both take them this time, and again, they immediately test positive. Now, here we are, quarantined, stuck at a campground. It's 114 degrees. Now, I had gone to Walmart and bought these window shades that you put in your cars. I had bought a bunch of them and cut them to the shape of the windows in the camper and taped them up on the wall, on the windows, trying to reflect some of the sun. And with all of that, and with the air conditioning running full blast, the best we could do in the camper was 101 degrees. Believe me when I tell you, we wanted to be somewhere else other than where we were at that moment. But we've all been there, right? I mean, we've been one place while we wished we were somewhere else. And maybe for you, some of you find yourself in a situation like that right now. You're here, you're in this situation, but you wish you were somewhere else. Maybe you're in a bad job or a job situation, a relationship. Maybe you're fighting an illness, whatever it is, but you're wishing you were somewhere else. But what if the place that you don't want to be is the exact place that you need to be? What if the place that you don't want to be is the exact place that you need to be? I think God has a word for all of us today, and specifically for some of you, and that word is this: you are right where you need to be. You are right where you need to be. In fact, here's what I want you to do. I want you to turn to somebody next to you and say with all the conviction that you can, you are right where you need to be. Go ahead and do that. If you're online, go ahead and type that in. You are right where you need to be. Some of you want to push back, and that's okay, but let me just say good morning and welcome. I know I am where I want to be this morning. The folks at the doors I was greeting with, some of our greeters were laughing at me because I kept looking at my watch, and time just wasn't going by fast enough for me to get up here and be able to speak and be back in front of you guys. I love you guys, missed you guys, and I personally am really glad to be back. It's good to be back. Now, as many of you know, sure, thank you. As many of you know, I've been on a sabbatical this summer. Now, some of you know that, some of you don't, because some of you have been like, where in the world have you been? And we didn't think you were coming back and all that stuff, but I'm back. So what is a sabbatical? Well, some think it's a long vacation. And I guess in some ways you could say it is. But to be honest with you, it's much more than that. I would think of it as a vacation with a very specific end in mind. I had hoped to take a biblical sabbatical back in 2020. That was my plan as we got closer to summer, but then the pandemic hit, and obviously all that got postponed. And you talk about speaking of being somewhere that you didn't want to be. I found myself, especially coming into this summer, at a place that I did not want to be. It wasn't that I didn't want to be here. It just, I didn't want to be feeling the way that I was feeling. I was so depleted, so tired, so worn out, and I knew that I just needed a break. In 2011, I had taken an unplanned sabbatical. In other words, I had gotten to a very unhealthy place and literally just had to step back, step down for a while. And I promised myself that I would never let that happen again. But as the pandemic lingered on, I found myself very tired, very worn out. Honestly, I found myself in this bad place of just trying to get through the next 7 days. If I can just get through next Sunday, if I can just get a message written this week and do halfway decent on stage Sunday morning, then I got 7 more days. And that's a horrible place to be in, to be honest with you. So all that to say, I am grateful that the SMT, our spiritual management team, gave me permission and with the support of the staff to take this sabbatical this summer. Now, as I entered the sabbatical, I did so with 5 goals in mind. In fact, these were the goals that I presented to our SMT and said, here's what I want to accomplish over these next several months. And so they're going to pop up. There you go. They're on the screen. So the first one was rest. First of all, I just needed to catch my breath. Second was to reset. Reset what I call, what scriptures call, my personal rhythms of grace, my spiritual disciplines. I was doing them, but I was just going through the motion, getting them done, being able to say that, I had done them. And again, that's just not a good place. It wasn't very fruitful, I can promise you that. To reconnect. I wanted to reconnect with my family. I wanted to reconnect with Nathan and Ev out in Arizona, spend a little bit of time with them. We did that at the beginning of the sabbatical, several weeks into it. In fact, on the way back from Arizona, we met up with my other son and daughter and grandkids, and we spent some time in Kentucky together. So right from the get-go, I was able to do that. One of the things that I didn't realize that I really needed to reconnect with until the end of my sabbatical was my calling. The calling that God had placed on my life. And so God really refreshed me and renewed that calling. And so I didn't even know that I needed that to the extent that I did. The other thing, this was where some self-imposed homework came in, and that was there was some reading that I wanted to do. I actually had 4 books, and I told our spiritual management team that these are the 4 books that I plan to read. I read those plus another one, and I didn't just want to read them. Oftentimes what I'm reading is in preparation for the next sermon, the next message, the next whatever, and so it was nice to kind of read these for myself and put some of that into practice. And then to spend some time reflecting. Spend some time reflecting and listening to God. I don't know if you ever take the time to actually try to listen to God. I know we're real good at talking to God and expressing our wants and our desires and our needs and all those things to God, but how often do we really sit and just listen for the voice of God to speak in our lives? And so that was another thing that I'd hope to do, and especially as the sabbatical ended. Well, I want to thank the leadership, I want to thank the staff, and I want to especially thank Trey for the incredible leadership that he provided over the summer. Sure. We have an incredible staff and an incredible leadership team, and I believe as a result of this sabbatical that I was able to take, that the church honestly will benefit from that. And I hope today will just be the beginning of that. But here's the deal. Even though the sabbatical was planned, Lynette and I found ourselves several times along the way wishing we were somewhere else. I talked about getting COVID at the very beginning. Several weeks later, Lynette would get sick again. This time it would last for 3 weeks, and we just knew that she had COVID. She had all the symptoms again. We kept taking tests. They kept coming negative, so who knows. But it took her 3 weeks to recover from that one, where the first go-round it was just a couple of days. In the middle of this time, I found myself confined to a sofa for 5 days, laying on my left side, recovering from a laser surgery to repair a torn retina in my eye. That was fun. At the end of our time together, in fact, it was our last planned trip together. We went away, went to see some things, and then we just spent some time, really our time to kind of reflect on all that had happened over the summer. The last night there, I'm loading a kayak on the truck, evidently pulled something in my neck, and for the next, 2.5, 3 weeks would suffer with a neck sprain. And so there were numerous times over the sabbatical that, believe me, we wished we were somewhere else. But, and I kind of laugh. I said, there's kind of two stories to our sabbatical. There's all the crazy, wild, bad stuff that happened, and then there's the really great stuff that happened. But here's what we know. We know that it's the same author in charge of both of those things. And God used both of those things very powerfully in our life. As only God can do, He showed up at the very beginning of our sabbatical, and He gave us this word of encouragement. It was one of these moments where you know that God is speaking to you, that word is for you, but you really don't and can't appreciate it fully in the moment, but you kind of hang on to it. And we did, and we didn't really appreciate it fully until the very last day of our sabbatical. But that word that God gave us early on, right from the beginning, was this: you are right where you need to be. You are right where you need to be. To be honest with you, I felt a little guilty taking time off, but God reminded me and made it very clear. This was just one incident that I was exactly where I needed to be. And so today, I want to say to you personally, I want to say to you as an individually in this room, watching online, Scottsville, whatever it is that you're going through, wherever you find yourself, you are exactly where you need to be. I want to say to us as a church corporately, we are right where we need to be as a church. I want to look today with you at a passage of Scripture with you about a day in the life of the disciples of Jesus Christ. A day that they found themselves in a place that they didn't want to be, wishing that they were somewhere else. The first 4 books of our New Testament are known as the Gospels. While they pretty much tell the same stories, they often tell it from a little different perspective. If 4 of us witnessed something and somebody interviewed us individually, we would each tell about this event that happened, but we would each tell it from our perspective, and we'd have little pieces to add to it that the other people wouldn't have. And oftentimes that's the way the Gospels work, which is what's really cool about that is we get an even fuller picture of some of the events that took place. And today's that we're going to look at happens to be one of those. So I want to pull from 2 views, 2 versions, accounts of this. It'll be Mark chapter 6, if you want to write this down, and Luke chapter 9. That's where I'm going to be pulling this from, and we'll look at some of these verses together. So I'm going to start in Luke chapter 9, verses 1 and 2. So here we go. It says, verse 1, when Jesus called, everybody say called. When Jesus had called the 12 together, He gave them power and authority to drive out all demons and to cure diseases. Everybody say He gave. He gave, and He sent them out to proclaim the kingdom of God and to heal the sick. Everybody say He sent. So God called them, He gave them, or He equipped them, and then He sent them. He called them. He said, I got something that I want you to do. He equipped them, he gave them what they needed to do it, and then he sent them out. Drop down to verse 9. It says, so they set out. In other words, Jesus said, go, they went. They did as he told them. So they set out and went from village to village, proclaiming the good news and healing people everywhere. When the apostles returned, they reported to Jesus what they had done. So they'd been out for several days doing what Jesus had asked them to do, and they were preaching and teaching and healing people and doing all of this stuff. And so now they've come back to Jesus to tell Jesus, and I think there's an air of excitement because they got to experience God working not just in them, but through them. And so they're anxious to get some time with Jesus and tell him about it. So verse 31 in Mark chapter 6, just to interject a little bit more here, says, then because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, Jesus said to them, come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. So let me just fill in the story then from there a little bit. They leave for a nearby town, but the crowds catch on. Listen, everywhere Jesus went, people followed. They wanted to be around him. They wanted to hear what he had to say. They had hoped maybe they'd be the next one that would get healed physically, mentally, emotionally, whatever, but they wanted to be in his presence. And so as Jesus and the disciples start to leave, somehow they get word, they figure out where they're heading, what town they're going to, and the crowd literally rushes ahead of them and meets them there when they get there. And so instead of a quiet place to rest, the disciples find themselves in the middle of a huge crowd. And when I say a huge crowd, I'm talking upwards of 15,000 people or more. Think about that. 15,000 people are now standing before them. They had gone to get away from all of this, but instead they end up walking right back into it. Not exactly a quiet place to rest. So Jesus sees the crowd, as he always was. He was filled with compassion for the people, where they were at, what they were facing. And then he begins to teach them. And this goes on all afternoon, goes on to late in the evening. If the disciples were not tired, they are super tired now. So they do what any of us would do. They come to Jesus with a plan. Verse 12 in Luke chapter 9. It says, late in the afternoon, the 12 come to him and said, send the crowd away. Everybody say, send the crowd away. So he says to them, send the crowd away so that they can go to the surrounding villages and countryside and find food and lodging, because we, everybody say we are in a remote place here. Now, on the surface, this seems like a really good idea, doesn't it? But remember, every good idea is not a God idea. This really isn't about the crowd. They're really not concerned about, the condition of the crowd and them not having something to eat. Their focus is really on themselves. We are in this remote place, so send these people away so that we can get some rest. Now, they use it as an excuse to say, hey, we're worried about them, but they really weren't worried about them. It was more of a focus on themselves than it was them. And we all have a tendency to do that, don't we? When we're faced with this multitude of a crowd, this overwhelming thing in our lives that we don't want, we don't want to be there, what do? We ask God to what? Send it away. Get rid of it. We all do that, and that's exactly what they're doing. But instead of sending the crowd away, Jesus has a better idea, and not just a better idea, but a God idea. See how I did that there? Any idea that Jesus had would be a God idea. Okay, just so you're tracking. All right. Verse 13, Jesus replies. He says, you give them something to eat. Their prayer of asking Jesus to send this multitude of a problem away from them doesn't work. He has a better idea, or at least a different idea as far as they're concerned. And so they pray and ask Jesus to do the next most logical thing. If you won't send them away, then send us away. Look at the next verse, verse 13. They answered, or they responded to Jesus. Listen, Jesus, we only have 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. You know the story. And then it says, unless, see, I'm convinced they're conniving already. They're thinking, okay, you won't send them away, but maybe instead you could send us away, unless we go and buy food for this crowd. About 5,000 men were there, and this is where we know that there was probably upwards or even more than 15,000 people, because this just mentions the men. All the scholars agree that there would have been women and children there, and probably pushed that number well above 15,000 people. But we've all done this, haven't we? We try to pray our unwanted situation away, and when that doesn't work, we pray that God somehow would send us away. God, if you're not going to take this away, then take me out of it. You know, somehow transform me or transport me to somewhere else. But just, either remove that or remove me. Anybody ever pray that prayer, or am I the only one that's ever prayed that prayer? But we've all prayed that. We all find ourselves in a place that we don't want to be, facing a multitude of a problem, a situation that's just bigger than us, and we would rather be anywhere than where we are. And so we ask God, please take this from me. And when God doesn't seem to be answering that prayer, we then ask God, well, if you're not going to fix this, then take me out of it and put me somewhere else. Maybe you're in a job, and it stinks, it's hard. You'd rather be anywhere else but where you're at. And you're praying, God, please make this situation better. But God doesn't seem to be making it better. And so what do you pray? God, can you help me find a new job? But what if right where you're at is where you need to be? Back to the story. This is where things get interesting. Verse 14 of Luke 9. But Jesus says to the disciples, have them sit down. Everybody say sit down. Have them sit down in groups of about 50 each. The disciples did so, and everyone sat down. I think this is a key part of the story that we often miss. Now, I had some people do some math for me a while ago because I'd meant to do it and forgot, but 15,000 people sitting in groups of about 50 would be about 300 groups. It's a lot of people. It's a lot of real estate in front of us with groups of people sitting there who are hungry, who are waiting to see what Jesus is going to do next. The disciples are just like, can we just move on and skip this part? They have no idea what's about to happen. So Jesus then, verse 16, taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, looks up to heaven, he gives thanks, and he breaks them. And then he gave them to disciples to distribute to the people. The people sat down. Jesus takes the 5 loaves of bread and the 2 fish. He gives thanks, and he begins to tear them apart, and he begins to hand them to the 12 disciples, and they begin to distribute it to all of these people. And even in their amazement, they're like, holy cow, where does this keep coming from? And Jesus keeps tearing, he keeps handing, and they keep distributing. In this part of the story, and this is where I think it's a key for us, he had them to sit down. He positioned them so that he could do what he does best. He could have sent them away, but instead, he allowed them and he really positioned them to be in a place to receive from God in a way that they could only. Our position in those toughest of situations is critical. Instead of complaining, instead of praying, send them away, send me away, what if we just sat down and said, okay, God, what do you want to do? And opened our hands up and just listen to see what he has to say. I love how this ends. Verse 17 says, they all ate and were satisfied. Everybody say satisfied. We can't really appreciate this word unless you dig into it a little bit. But I want you to think for just a moment of a time in your life when you were like, satisfied. I'm talking like you had everything you wanted and needed, and you just thought, could life get any better than this at this moment? Ever had a meal where you pushed back from the table and you knew you were satisfied. I mean, you were satisfied so much that it hurt because you had eaten so much. Anybody ever done that? Okay, this is the picture of the word satisfied. You know what the word satisfied, it could have been translated to fatten. Somebody dared me to say this, but some of you are more satisfied than others. I'm just saying. Ed Booth's about to die back here. Did he really go there? They ate and were satisfied. Think about that. I want you to get this picture. Think about where the disciples were for just a moment, because look what happens next. And the disciples picked up how many baskets? 12. How many of them were there? 12 disciples. You guys know the story of the Bible, right? All right, just making sure. All right, so and where were they at? They were tired and hungry and looking to get away to get satisfied. And so Jesus satisfies them as well. They each get a basket of food for themselves. And I pictured that there was probably even enough in there to take back to their families and share with them that night. But they were satisfied. You know, the situation didn't change. God kept them right in the middle of it so that he could do what he really wanted to do, to work in them and to work through them. And I think the same is true for you and me. And again, there are two ways that I'm coming at this morning. For you as an individual, because some of you are struggling with where you're at, and you would rather be anywhere but where you're at. And yet God wants you to know that you're right where you need to be. You just need to position yourself to receive from God. For us as a church, I believe that we're right where we need to be as a church. You know, for over 2 years, we've been wishing we were somewhere else, haven't we? As we've walked through the last 2 years since 2020, man, how many times have you thought, I'll be glad when this is over? I'll be glad when we're somewhere other than where we are right now. And guess what? We are somewhere now other than where we were then. But how satisfied are you? How satisfied are you? Still complaining? Now I wish I were somewhere else other than where I am right now? I got to be honest with you, as a pastor of the church and looking at where we are now versus where we were 2.5, 3 years ago, it can be a little depressing to go, man, we're half the size as far as people attending and go, man, God, what's going on? And fix this. And yet I believe God has said, listen, as a church, you are right where you need to be. And I think we need to position ourselves to say, okay, God, instead of fixing this or whatever it is, just show me what is it that you want to do in me and through me. So I'd ask this question, what would it look like for God to satisfy you right now? See, we think if we could just get out of this hard place that we're in, we'd be satisfied. But yet if we think about it, we get out of one hard place and find ourselves in another hard place and we're still not satisfied. But so often that hard place that we're in is the very place that we need to be to see and to receive from God. I heard someone preaching on this passage said, the bigger the multitude, the bigger the blessing, or the bigger the miracle that God's about to do. So I'm going to say it this way for all of us. The hardest situations often yield the sweetest outcomes. The hardest situations often yield the sweetest outcomes. There's a song that's become very popular this year, came out in March of this year, and I know when I first heard it, I fell in love with it, and I think it was more just because it was a catchy tune and I liked what it said, and without really thinking about what it said. As a congregation, we have sung this song a couple times that I know of over the summer while I wasn't here. One, I think, was at the concert our summer concert that Lynette and I actually did come to. But the song is called Honey in the Rock. Anybody ever heard that song? It's called Honey in the Rock. And we're going to sing it together today. But I don't know if you've ever really considered the words to this song, Honey in the Rock. I mean, when you think about it, the last place that you're going to find honey is what? In a rock. But yet we sing this song and somehow we find hope in it and we're encouraged by it. But at the, sometimes you ever think people who don't get it, and maybe you're one of those and you're like, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard, and people are singing it and they're, but it doesn't make sense. And it doesn't make sense because honey doesn't come from a rock. It's the last place that you would expect to get honey from. So what is this song talking about? Listen, I love it, the song, when I first heard it, but as I began to just really think about it, and this happened while we were traveling a lot this summer. The song would come on the radio, and I would sing it, but then I would start thinking about it, and I started putting it together with the words that God gave me at the beginning of the summer, that you are right where you need to be, even in these hard places that you find yourself in, and begin to think about the lyrics to this song. I want you to listen to it. There's honey in the rock, water in the stone, manna on the ground no matter where I go. I don't need to worry now that I know everything I need you've got. There's honey in the rock. In other words, from the hardest of places, the hardest of situations and circumstances in our lives can come the sweetest outcomes. God can use those hard places sometimes to work in us and through us. And out of that, we can experience some of the sweetest moments with God. I've often shared with people who are going through hard times and said, listen, from personal experience, you're about to experience God in a way that you could never experience if it wasn't for this rock, this hard place in your life. Because only people who go through those kind of hard situations and turn to God can experience God in a way that you just can't experience Him when everything's great and wonderful. And I can tell you from personal experience that some of the sweetest things have come from some of the hardest things in my life. This song is based on something that God once spoke to the children of Israel as they found themselves in a place that they didn't want to be, wishing that they were somewhere else, which was often the case. In fact, this phrase, honey from the rock or honey in the rock, is only mentioned twice in the Bible, and one of them is really referencing the other. The first time it's mentioned is Deuteronomy chapter 32. The other time it's mentioned is in Psalms 81, and it's really referencing somebody has taken this story from Deuteronomy and made a song out of it, kind of like we do today. I want to read to you Psalms 81 this morning, where this comes from, and I want you to just listen to the words. It begins this way: sing for joy to God our strength. Shout aloud to the God of Jacob. Begin the music, strike the timbrel, play the melodious harp and lyre. In other words, the choir master is encouraging people to sing about the goodness of God and the greatness of God. He says, get ready, let's do this. And then he says, I heard an unknown voice, and here's the song starting in verse 6. I removed the burden from their shoulders. Their hands were set free from the basket. The writer, and really God speaking, is reminding them of how He brought them through hard places before in their lives. And even though they find themselves in another hard place, He's reminding them, hey, remember what I did there? I can do it here. He says, I removed the burden from their shoulders, and their hands were set free from the basket. In your distress, you called, and I rescued you. I answered you out of a thundercloud. I tested you at the waters of Meribah. Hear me, my people, and I will warn you, if you would only listen to me, God says. You shall have no foreign God among you. You shall not worship any God other than me. I am the Lord your God, who brought you up out of Egypt. Open wide your mouth, and I will fill it. But my people would not listen to me. They would not submit to me. So I gave them over to their stubborn hearts to follow their own devices. He says, if my people would only listen to me, if Israel, if you and me would only follow my ways, God says, how quickly I would subdue their enemies and turn my hand against their foes. Those who hate the Lord, he says, they would cringe before him, and their punishment would last forever. But you who will listen to me, he says, would be fed with the finest of wheat, with honey from the rock. I would satisfy you. With honey from the rock, I would satisfy you. From that hard place that you find yourself in, I will satisfy you in a way that you just cannot imagine. Today I ask our band to bookend our time together with the two songs that we did. Both of these are some of my favorite songs. The first one was titled The Goodness of God. And so we started by singing and reminding ourselves and worshiping and praising God for his goodness and his faithfulness over the years. Here's what you sang. I love you, Lord, for your mercy never fails me. All my days I've been held in your hands. I love your voice. You have led me through the fire. In the darkest night, you are close like no other. I've known you as a father. I've known you as a friend. And I have lived in the goodness of God. And all my life, you have been faithful. All my life, you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. I wonder how many of us sang that song while wishing we were somewhere else other than where we're at. Now the band's going to lead us in this song, Honey in the Rock. And two things I hope. I hope you will hear this song like you've never heard it before. And two, I hope you will sing it like you've never sang it before. Here are the lyrics. There's honey in the rock, water in the stone, manna on the ground. No matter where I go, I don't need to worry now that I know everything I need, you've got. There's honey in the rock, praying for a miracle, thirsty for the living well, only you can satisfy. Sweetness at the mercy seat. Now I've tasted, it's not hard to see, only you can satisfy. Would you stand with us this morning as we sing this together?
Well, thanks so much again for stopping by. If you have any questions or would like to get connected here at Atlee Church, we would love to help or serve you any way that we can. And if God is doing something awesome in your life, we'd love to hear about it. You can email us directly at stories@atleechurch.org. And if you would like to support the ministries here at Atlee financially, you can go to our website and click the top tab, Give, and that helps us continue to get these messages out there and make a difference in the lives of so many. Well, thanks for tuning in, and we hope to see you again next week.